Okay, colleagues, greetings and welcome back. A slightly different video today. So let me begin by saying that this is related to our course in modern political theory, but strictly speaking, this is not going to be part of our course. So if you're here strictly for political philosophy, well, this is not part of the program, let's put it that way. The reason, however, like what is the relation? What is the relation? The relation is the following. Whenever we talk about politics, questions of God and questions of theology arise often. Specifically, we have philosophers such as Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Hegel, who talk about God extensively, or Marx, who famously argues against religion, right? So definitely this topic of religion and of theology has important relation to our course. And there's honestly never enough time in class to discuss this in detail. So this is basically the reason, this is the point of this video right here. And again, it's like these are the things we never have time for, mostly because they are something like a bit of an off topic, right? So that's my best attempt at giving you a feel, of giving you a preview of what this is going to be like. So this potentially, I'm not sure, this could turn out to be a quite long and quite rambling video, maybe somewhat chaotic, because I want to lay out in front of you the content of my mind to the best of my ability. But I'll try to be concise. Anyway, let's start somewhere. And let me also try to give you a feel for the conclusion I'm trying to reach, which is not going to be an easy thing, but nevertheless. So the immediate occasion for a video like this is a situation I find myself very often, in which I find myself very often. A first-year student comes up to me after class and says, "Alex, do you believe in God?" And I want to try to get across a certain feel, right, for the way this question sounds in my head, right? So it's not like, it's not like a question, do you like chocolate? Or have you been to Japan? Okay? These are simple questions, right? But when I hear a question, do you believe in God? To me, this question sounds like, Alex, do you believe that Hilbert space of the wave function of the universe, do you believe it's locally finite or infinite? Or do you believe in axions? Do you believe that axions exist? Do you believe that God exists? Do you believe that axions exist? Do you believe that dark matter exists? Maybe, do you believe that axioms are dark matter? Axions, right? Do you believe in Goldbach conjecture? Or maybe, do you believe in Taniyama-Shimura conjecture? Oh, sorry, that one is easy. That That has been proven by Andrew Wiles. Okay, this last one, get this off the list. Okay, this one is no longer a conjecture. This is a theorem. Everybody should believe that. If you don't go right now, go believe in Taniyama-Shimura conjecture. Proven by Andrew Wiles in 1993, right? So, apologies. It's like, this is like a super difficult question. Do you believe in God? Why do people expect a simple, straightforward answer, yes or no? But somehow, we live in a culture, and again, I'm not a professional sociologist, but I have to deal with sociological topics. So as a person who has training in social theory, I think I understand, on some level, the basic reason why people take this question in the following fashion, and especially why people expect a simple answer, right? Yeah, I don't want to talk about everything at the same time, but like Rousseau talks about his civil religion, right? Civil religion, this is something like patriotism, should be affirmed by every member of society. You're not supposed to, so this is Socrates versus Rousseau, if you want. Well, is it? Let me ask this question. So if you ask, are you a patriot, right? For Rousseau, if you live in a true social contract, the answer should be immediate yes. But Socrates is not like that, right? Socrates will stop and think and say, well, Rousseau, what do you mean by patriotism, right? And this is obviously the old question between philosophy and poetry, the way that Homer sets this up. Sorry, not Homer, but Plato sets this up, right? His competition with Homer, if you want. But of course, when we talk about poetry, what we actually mean is religion. And this is the way, in an important sense, in which Plato means this, right? So whereas religion operates through insight, and again, the idea, especially of Homeric mystical religion in Plato's context, is that the poet is inspired by the muse. Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles. Right? This is the beginning of the Iliad. It is not Homer who speaks. It is God or gods, or in this case the muse, a goddess, who speaks through Homer. Right? So Homer is not speaking in his own voice. This is prophecy. So you're just being a mouthpiece for God. You are not speaking. Gods speak through you. Right? Whereas philosophy, from the very beginning, has this very important dialogical or public nature. This ties in a little bit to the video I did recently about mystics and dictators. But I believe in giving conclusions up front. So let me try to formulate some kind of a thesis. So on going back to this slide maybe for 1 second. So Rousseau versus Socrates, well, it's nuances to this dichotomy. But what I'm driving at is that I see Rousseauian side of the equation, like this functionalist account of religion. Religion as a stabilizing force in society. I want to take this seriously, right? So the thesis, I suppose, is the following. Some people are believers. Some people are atheists. And in an important sense, I kind of disagree with both, right? So it's like the usual way in which people believe in God, I think, is kind of, well, okay, I don't want to get people upset. The point of this video is not to get people upset, okay? And is not to make people angry or outraged. This is not the purpose. Again, we're hopefully proceeding in the spirit of a free and equal discussion. But again, whenever people say they believe in God, I hear this in light of these kinds of questions. This is far too difficult a question for a regular person in the street to have an intelligent opinion about. And you could say, well, a person in the street has an intuition. Well, intuition is a problematic thing because, first of all, intuition is not necessarily easily made public. And secondly, we have intuitions about all sorts of things which turn out to be false. So intuition is not a very good guide to reality, I think. And again, tying back to the previous video, famous quote by Richard Feynman, you are the easiest person to fool. It is the easiest to fool yourself. So people get a hunch or an intuition, but how do you know? How do you know, right? And another video I did about ideology, where I mentioned that the problem of ideology has occupied me ever since I was an undergraduate, right? This idea that somehow there's something creeping inside your head, right? And I don't know, society or structures of language or biological mechanisms, right, that make you misperceive reality in a systematic fashion. And if you cannot trust your thoughts, then intuition doesn't account for much, right, on the one hand. On the other hand, you need to have a critical stance, right? The only way you can say that you believe something, according to John Stuart Mill, again, I'm tying this constantly back to our course, but still, John Stuart Mill would say that the only way you can believe in something is if you have examined the best arguments on the other side. And clearly, most believers have never done that. So to what extent and in what sense they believe, and do they really understand what they believe in? Most Christians, have they read the Bible? Have they read it carefully? Do they understand the implications? Do they know what this book talks about? It's a daunting book, right? Or, it's like, so talk about sacred texts, Bible, Quran, Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, I don't know, the Buddhist Jatakas. It's a lot to take in. It's kind of, if somebody has a PhD in religious studies, okay, maybe they're qualified to talk about that. But again, a person in the street sounds a bit too simple. Again, if we're trying to take this question seriously. But in a similar fashion, you understand, right? So I'm trying to say that I would not allocate myself in either of the categories. So I don't want to say I'm a believer, and I also don't want to say I'm an atheist for many reasons. By the way, so texts. Should I talk about texts? I mentioned a second ago, right, that believing in being a Christian, right, believing in God, has something to do with reading the Bible. I'm not sure. It's like I feel that this is an interesting presupposition. I'm not sure if it's warranted. Was this always the case? Did Christians always believe this? Do all Christians believe this? That reading the Bible, reading the text is the most important thing? Could it be that reading the text, reading the Bible is the most important thing? Could it be that this has emerged after the printing press, after Luther? Because again, before that, most people could not read. And for them to be a Christian was just to listen to what the priests are saying. Right? It's an important caveat. I'm sorry for breaking our stride, but I think it's an important caveat. I don't know enough about history of religion to have an intelligent opinion, honestly. Because again, apart from the text, there's also the priests. There's the community. There's the practice of everyday rituals like prayer, which may be important in its own right. Anyway, so I wouldn't allocate myself to the category of believers. I don't want to allocate myself into the category of atheists. First of all, because before you say, oh, I don't believe in this or that, you have to tell me what is it that I do not believe in, right? Again, so we talked in the previous slide, I talked about axions, or I don't know, neutralinos, or again, this dimensionality of Hilbert space. It's like, if the question is well defined, I can try to give an answer. Say hi to David Hume, right? There's always problems in defining questions. There's always problems with giving answers. But some questions are better defined, I feel, than other questions. So just to give this blanket statement, I'm an atheist. This kind of sounds a bit too, how should I put this? A bit too naive, a bit too simplistic, right? And in general, there's the very famous New Atheist movement, championed by people like Richard Dawkins, and I hear what they're saying, but in many ways, I don't find myself necessarily agreeing with what they're saying often. So very often I disagree with what atheists are saying because their view is too simplistic. Again, I disagree with believers because their view is too simplistic. I disagree with atheists because their view is too simplistic. Should I call myself an agnostic? Well, I don't know. Labels. You see, these are labels. We try to categorize people into neat categories. So I want to, if there's a takeaway point, I think the main takeaway point is that this is a serious question, requires a serious problem, right? So this has been a question that has kept me up at night for many years of my life, that has preoccupied me, right? So like, if you want, I am, what's her face? I am motivated, animated by this question. And I think that's the spirit. That's the right spirit to approach this question. So if I'm trying to do anything in this video, is maybe impart a bit of an open-mindedness and enthusiasm towards this question. Greeks have this wonderful word, skeptikos, which means inquirer. Right? Somebody who is asking questions. To be a skeptic is to keep asking questions. Well, I feel that with respect to the question of God, I am very much a skepticos. Not in the sense of a skeptic, but in the sense of an inquirer. I want to keep asking questions, and I don't think I have an answer yet. But I have some preliminary considerations. So let me get them out. So this is a bit general, maybe too general. So let's try to start somewhere. Well, yeah, also I guess it's going to be a strange thing to say, but still, I kind of, maybe I should take a moment to apologize, because this is something definitely I think is a defect of mine, and something I hope to improve upon in the future. Whenever I talk about religion, I get very passionate. And very often in my lectures, in my seminars, in videos down here, I say things which sound a bit maybe too rough around the edges. And I'm trying to look for more equanimity. Okay? I'm not trying to pick fights. I'm not trying to get people upset, regardless of what I say. At least, that it's my conscious intention, and I do hope to achieve more equanimity, more calmness and tranquility towards these issues. But again, it's like, I hope you can understand at least a little bit where I'm coming from, because again, I'm in these first few minutes, I'm trying to lay out, I'm trying to just impress you with the notion of how this is a difficult question that has a problematic resolution. And then you see a person in the street, just a random person in the street, maybe a child, 15 years old, says, I believe in God. Of course there's a God. And if you don't, you'll go to hell. It's like not just a God, but a particular God, maybe with a name, maybe with a set of revealed commandments, right? With a particular history of relationship with humanity. And it's like, it's hard to have a dialogue like this, right? Because very clearly, the presuppositions, my presuppositions, and a presupposition like of a child of 15 years old from the street, or some other person like that, right? The presuppositions are very different, right? So I could ask this child, have you proven the Goldbach conjecture? How do you know that there's a God, right? Isn't this too simple? Isn't this too easy? Faith, right? But faith is politically problematic. Again, think of Nietzsche, think of Freud, think of Marx, all the ways in which we can be systematically misled into believing things which are not true. Faith is a problematic question. And it's very interesting also to how philosophers like Pascal, so this is the famous fideist position, philosophers like Pascal or Kant would say that it's actually impossible to prove the existence of God. So limit reason to make room for faith. Right? But you see, the problem with this position is that if you ask Immanuel Kant, so it's like it works in theory. It works in theory. Kant says you cannot either prove or disprove the existence of God. And again, now we have an important Christian philosopher, right, who asserts very forcefully that we cannot prove the existence of God. In fact, we cannot say meaningfully anything about the existence of God. So God is a noumenon, a thing in itself. Human beings have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of God, Kant would say, right? So you cannot prove the existence of God. You cannot disprove. You cannot even understand what you're talking about when you say the word God. Again, and how does this square? How does this relate to ordinary views of people in the street? Right? So a lot of people would like to call Kant to their defense, but do they really understand what kind of defense Kant is making? Moses Mendelssohn very famously called Kant the great destroyer, because if this is what you need to do in order to save faith, by first saying that human beings have absolutely no knowledge, no understanding of the meaning of the concept of God, right? That's going to be an interesting defense, right? But still, let me go back to my point, right? So if you try to say to play this game and to say, well, let's limit reason to make room for faith, sometimes this is referred to by opponents of this view as God of the gaps, God of the gaps, right? That we cannot explain something, there's a gap in our knowledge, so let's fill it with God. Now in principle, I don't have to tell you, I don't, this is not a very strong argument, God of the gaps, right? And in general, this limit reason to make room for faith, I don't think it's a very strong argument. But Nietzsche or Freud or Marx is going to talk, they're going to ask this question, what is the genetic account? Right? So how did you, Kant, how did you become a Christian? How is it that you have your Christian faith in the first place? And the answer is not some kind of, Kierkegaardian deep leap of faith or something like that, some miracle of the soul. The answer is banal. It is as banal as possible. You, Emmanuel, you are a Christian because your mama was a Christian. And for the vast majority of believers throughout the ages, this was always the answer. People are Christians, or Jews or Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists, because their parents are Christians or Muslims or Jews or Hindus or Buddhists. And that's not a very satisfying answer. It's an answer that should make us nervous. Again, to go back to this point by John Stuart Mill, we can only say that we believe something if we have examined the best argument on the other side. We can only say that we believe something if we have examined the best argument on the other side. Right? So at this point, I could imagine this dialogue, imaginary dialogue between me and you, the listener, the dear listener, could go in many different directions, but let me try to maybe tie it back to the course. And let's talk about God and politics, and God and political philosophy, if you want. And I want to talk at least briefly about Hobbes, about Rousseau, well, Locke, at some point, I don't know, and Hegel. When we're going to talk about Hobbes, we should also mention at least a word about Spinoza. Let's keep Kant maybe also at the back of our heads. So this is, I'm not going to talk about them in details. It's like I'm trying to draw a painting. I'm trying to paint a picture, right? And I have these buckets of paint, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke. I'm going to take a few drops from each, and we're going to try to assemble something resembling a picture. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So Hobbes very famously begins by saying that God is incomprehensible. God is incomprehensible, right? And students love to debate this question. Was Hobbes an atheist or not? And in many ways, it's an endless debate. And you see, again, for the same reasons we began with, right? So I said, like, do you believe in Hilbert space or dark matter, axions, Kullback conjecture? Most people don't know what the hell this means, right? So most people, most students that I talk to, when they begin debating whether Hobbes was a believer or not, they don't understand Hobbes very well. They don't understand religion like theology very well. So this is a doubly difficult enterprise, and it tends to occupy a lot of time during class. But it's gets people animated, right? Very interestingly, the Cambridge Introduction by Robert Tuck, I think. I hope I'm getting the name right. Calls Hobbes a Christian atheist. This is a wonderful, wonderful formulation. Wonderful formulation. And there's something to it. But if you look at Hobbes, at the basics of his idea, what Hobbes is saying, Hobbes is an empiricist. And as an empiricist, he knows that we can only have knowledge which is what he defines as natural knowledge. And this means that any kind of miracle is necessarily off limits. So we have no knowledge of miracles. And also we have no natural knowledge of God. right? And Hobbes insists on this over and over and over again. He talks about how people can pray to God, people can worship God, and when they use the word God, again, it's a position which anticipates Kant, right? This is basically exactly what Kant is going to talk about down the line. So when people pray to God or when they talk about God, they are being respectful. They are not expressing knowledge. When Christians, according to Hobbes, say, I believe in God the Father, this is not a declaration of a belief, like a positive statement, right? This is a declaration of piety, right? Of submission, right? We are honoring God by saying that God is great, because God, technically speaking, is not great. God is beyond great. We do not know what God is. We have no knowledge, we have no understanding. So we cannot say God is great and attribute the property of greatness to God. So instead what we're doing is we are simply being respectful. We are taking the most awesome word of our language and we're attributing that to God. And this is one side of the argument, and we're going to talk about political implications in a second. This goes back to the ancient tradition of apophatic theology. I'm not sure whom this tradition begins with, but we can talk about maybe Xenophanes with his critique of anthropomorphization of the Olympian gods. So Xenophanes versus of the Olympian gods, right? So Xenophanes is basically going to say that, look, when people, well, sorry, I mean, the famous statement by Xenophanes is that he says that people in Africa who are black draw their gods with black skin. And he says if there were horses, if horses had gods, their gods would be horses, right? So the idea is that instead of worshiping God, we are anthropomorphizing nature. We are attributing certain human properties to nature. And that's a very deep point, right? Mentioned this again in the previous video about prophets. Richard Feynman, again, this quote, that you are the easiest person to fool. When a religious zealot sits down and meditates and looks inside their soul, what do they see? What do they see? What would we expect a person to see when they look deep inside their soul? Themselves. So a person sits down, meditates, sees themselves inside of themselves, and then extrapolates and says, well, the whole world is myself. Atman is equal to Brahman, right? The Hindu idea. Is this a knockdown argument against religion? Well, no, it's not a knockdown argument, but it's a reason to be suspicious. It's a reason to be suspicious of our intuition. Our intuition misleads us very, very easily in this sense. So what apophatic theology tries to do is to say that you cannot talk about God except in negative terms. You cannot say that God is good. You cannot say that God is evil. You can't say that God is great. You can't say that God is small. Because God is beyond all of these characteristics. God is beyond language. So, position, again, associated with Plotinus, maybe to some extent. It's a very famous, very important early Christian theologian who signs himself as Dionysius the Areopagite, or at least maybe that's the attribution. But today scholars call him Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. Right. I hope it's spelled something like this. And you could ask a very important question. What is the difference between apophatic theology apophaticism. I'm not sure how to make this into a noun. Yeah, let me write apophaticism. What is the difference between this, on the one hand, and on the other hand, agnosticism, and on the other hand, atheism? So this is as close as I will get in this talk to a thesis, right? This is my thesis. I believe that in a certain sense, some form of atheism, however you define atheism, is the only non-blasphemous position, is the only non-idolatrous position. Because if you start attributing properties to God, again, God here defined as some kind of ultimate principle of the universe. So we say there is an ultimate principle of the universe, and we start attributing properties to it, right? It's very easy to fall into anthropomorphization, and again, attribute human properties to God. So to anthropomorphize God. And this is, again, in some sense, well, is idolatry, is this bad? I'm not sure, I don't want to say it's bad. I just want to say it's intellectually problematic in the sense that you are making a false attribution, right, for the wrong reason. I don't think it's a moral sin, right? But I think it is an intellectual shortcoming. Let's put it that way. And yeah, so let me maybe talk about this point, right? So we talk about the fundamental, the ultimate principle of the universe. Right. And if you think about this, actually, right? When people talk about, do you believe in God? Okay, like define God, right? If you say that God is whatever is the fundamental unifying principle of the universe, some kind of ultimate principle that's behind all of this, well, if you believe in the standard model of particle physics, or if you believe in lambda CDM cosmology, those things are supposed to apply across the board. So it could very well be, or I would say that, like, when physicists do their physics, they all assume that there is a unifying underlying principle to the cosmos, right? We are, when physicists are searching for dark matter or dark energy or supersymmetry or the multiverse, right? We are assuming that there's a certain unity between the universe as it exists now and the universe that existed at the time of the Big Bang. That there's a certain unity, commonality of laws in the universe as it exists right here in this place on planet Earth, and billions of light years away, hundreds of billions of light years away, right? So it seems to be a fairly innocuous presupposition, the way science is made. We don't know this by any stretch. We don't know this. We don't have knowledge of this. We cannot prove this. But we assume this for science, in order to make science possible. It's a tentative hypothetical assumption. Notice, not faith, but a tentative hypothetical assumption. And I feel that when people talk about certain proofs of God's existence, like Anselm's proof, ontological argument, I don't necessarily want to go into this right now. You can look it up on your own. Many of you probably know what I'm talking about. What did Anselm prove? What did Anselm prove? Right? Maybe Anselm just proves the existence of the universe. Okay, the universe exists. Wow, that's an amazing discovery. So what, right? It's one thing to say that there's one universe, we live in one universe, right? And how about if you call universe God? Is universe just God? This is what Spinoza does, right? So he talks about, Spinoza talks about this God or nature. When you put it this way, it sounds very different. So, and again, now try to get into my shoes. Again, a first-year student comes up to me and says, Alex, do you believe in God? Let's imagine I'm a Spinozist. Do you believe in nature? Think about what this question sounds like. Do you believe in nature? Well, it's either trivially, yes, of course I believe in nature. I see it with my own eyes outside the window. Even if my eyes deceive me, probably there's some different kind of nature behind than this nature of appearances, right? Or, so it's like, the answer is like, trivially, yes, of course I believe in nature, but it's not an interesting fact about me. Any sane person should believe in nature. Or maybe you mean something very specific by nature, and you say, well, you know, nature is actually a sack of potatoes, right? And I'm like, what do you mean nature is a sack of potatoes? Well, you got to understand, when you say that the ultimate principle of the universe became flesh and came to die for us on a cross for our sins, you know, it sounds a bit as, you know, approximately as bizarre as saying that nature is a sack of potatoes. It seems like a category mistake, right? You're taking something universal and transcendental beyond time and space, and you're trying to anthropomorphize it into a familiar category, right? Or you say, you know, the ultimate principle of the universe talked to me in my dream, in my sleep. Nature talked to me while I was asleep. Notice also, Spinoza, interestingly, will say that you should not really think of God as spirit or soul. This is also, again, go back to Xenophonies, right? This anthropomorphization, right? This idea that we are conscious beings, and so we assume that God is also conscious, that God is consciousness, right? And I think Plato, maybe, like, I don't want to say Plato, ancient Platonists would say, well, yeah, of course, you see, the world of matter is imperfect, it's ever-changing. But the world of spirit is changeless and eternal. Concepts like perfection or concepts like geometric figures, right? They are eternal and changeless. They cannot be destroyed. So surely God, who is the most perfect and eternal and changeless of everything that exists, should be more like mathematical concepts than like matter. Well, it's an argument. It's an ancient argument. Is it a good argument? I'm not sure. Again, it depends on what you mean by, right? Our contemporary theories of matter, in our contemporary theories of matter, there are conservation laws. So energy, for example, is also, you know, in some sense, eternal and changeless. It's an interesting, you know, how maybe the expansion of the universe breaks the conservation of energy, but there's mathematical ways around this, having to do with tensor calculus, right? You know, kind of, it all depends on what you mean by it, right? So what Spinoza actually says, is that consciousness is just one aspect of God, one of the aspects. So matter is an aspect of God. This res extensa, or I should say extension. So he takes this from, Spinoza takes this from Descartes. He says extension is an aspect of God. Cognition is an aspect of God. But get this, God is not a mind in the same way that God is not a rock. God has an infinite number of aspects, of which we can perceive only two. Which are mind and matter. But in fact, God has infinite aspects, And, you know, I don't want to just identify my position with the position of Spinoza, but I'm sort of, I think Spinoza is a very good litmus test. So it's a very good test case, right? If you have theological beliefs, see how they compare to Spinoza's beliefs. Very often, ideas that Spinoza has and questions that he asks, like, don't coincide very well with people's understanding of God. And I feel that there's a lot to be gained by comparing any religious view to Spinoza's view, right? Actually, let me continue this discussion, right? So I kept talking about how there is the ultimate principle of the universe, and there is maybe what do you call it? People have certain intuitions about it, but we have an opposing point of view. There's this ancient tradition, and again, we keep talking about the new atheists, whatever, right? But apart from the new atheists, we also have the Buddhist tradition. And the Buddhist tradition is complicated. I don't want to oversimplify it. It's I should say Buddhist traditions, right, in the plural. And at least in some of these traditions, the idea is that nothing has substantiality. Nothing has substantiality. So in fact, God certainly does not exist. God certainly does not exist. But also the universe, in an important sense, does not exist. And you do not exist. Right? So again, it's like, I want to say, maybe the challenge of Spinoza, and the challenge of Buddhism are the two interesting intellectual challenges to common forms of religious belief. So yeah, again, especially this idea of insight, intuition. I have an intuition. God speaks to me when I sleep. Well, Buddhists are going to say that our mind is riddled with illusions. How do you know that it's not an illusion? Hobbes, by the way, would say exactly the same thing. He says, if you saw God in your dream, how do you know that God spoke to you and not that you have simply dreamt of God, had an illusion of God? Hobbes insists you cannot know this. Another important challenge that comes from the Buddhists goes back to, and Rousseau is going to talk about this important thing. This is the problem of evil. Again, we can compare this to the Buddhists, at least some forms of Buddhism. Again, so Buddhism tries to argue against Hindus' perception of God, and especially this notion that God, I would imagine, Brahma or Brahman in the Hindu context, is this benevolent creator. And the Buddhists are going to say, well, but the universe, the human life, is so full of suffering and misery. How can you square this with the notion of the omnipotent and omnibenevolent God, right? So all-powerful and all-loving God. Surely, an all-powerful and all-loving God could have created a better universe. And yeah, theologians will debate. This is not really a knockdown argument, but honestly, I feel that this is maybe the strongest emotional argument against belief in God, right? Or at least against belief in a commonly understood God as all-loving and all-powerful. But you see, again, saying that God is all-loving and all-powerful, this is also an anthropomorphization. What do you mean all-loving? The God should care about your feelings? So again, if you take Pseudo-Dionysius seriously, if you take Hobbes seriously, God is beyond that. God is not all-loving. God is beyond love. So, God is beyond good and evil, our small, tiny conceptions of good and evil. And I think I'm not sure we should get into Rousseau deeply, but I feel that Rousseau's solution to the problem of evil is that he wants to deny the all-power, omnipotence of God. In fact, I feel that Rousseau prefers to speak of God as a female, right? Nature as a female. She is powerless. Not completely powerless, but not perfectly powerful also. Nature is weak and vulnerable, and that's why there's evil. Is this some kind of dualism? Well, maybe to some extent, yes. Maybe to some extent, yes. Some form of dualism. And religiosity is very important for political reasons for Rousseau. Because he thinks this is the glue that ties society together. But it's like in the face of in the face of the problem of evil, what Rousseau is going to say, I feel that the best way to understand what Rousseau is saying is like, declaration of faith is a political act, is a political action, right? It's like if you imagine, this has important analogies with Emile Durkheim, right? This society worshipping itself, like a certain basis of social cohesion. So first and foremost, for Rousseau, his views of religion have to do with this, the sanctity of the social contract. So basically, the core of religion for Rousseau is that we say that the social contract is sacred, and anybody who breaks it is cursed, be damned, right? It's a taboo to break the social contract. And you could say, well, is it really the case? Is it true that the social contract is sacred? And the answer is, well, no, not exactly. Of course, people break the social contract all the time, and societies do collapse all the time. But it is more like a performative action. Performative action, or performative act, if you want, performative speech act. We declare the social contract to be sacred, and thereby we make it sacred. So because it's like this Thomas theorem, you know, or social constructivism, right? Things which are perceived as real are real in their effects. So if you tell me that there's a tiger on the loose, if I believe you, I'm going to start running regardless of whether there is a tiger or not. So believing makes it so. So believing that the social contract is sacred makes it sacred. So this is a very important functional account of religion. And I feel that this has this obviously has turned out to be a very chaotic talk, even maybe slightly more chaotic than I planned, than I was hoping for. But still, let me try to draw this discussion by focusing on two issues, right? So on the one hand, we have this functional account, and on the other hand, I want to talk about mystery of being. So, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful towards religions for many reasons. One important reason is that, again, as a sociologist, I understand the important stabilizing function of religion. New atheists, well, Bertrand Russell isn't exactly a new atheist, but it's in the same spirit. New atheists very often say, religion has done no good. Never ever has religion done any good. But Bertrand Russell says that the only thing that religion has done is the pyramids. That's the only achievement. That's overly simplistic. Right? When you look at human communities surviving and thriving in difficult environments, like imagine some snowy mountain, and people paving the roads, building bridges in precipices and gorges of some mountains in the Alps or in Tibet or somewhere, right? So people may be animated by religious feeling, right? So what if you look at Swiss railroads, or let's say, right, railroads in the Alps, some of them look very dangerous, very precarious. When I look at those things, I imagine that people who have made them were devout Christians, and their faith in a Christian God, their faith in Jesus who died for their sins, right? This is what animated them. This is what held their society together. And it seems a bit naive and disrespectful to just say, religion is worthless, all these people are just cognitively wrong, right? There's something going on deeper or different from, God is not a theory of cosmology, right? God is an important sociological phenomenon, which has sociological roots and sociological functions, right? And we have this ancient philosopher, Critias, who's a sophist, potentially Plato's uncle, who says it's not God who makes men, but it's men who invent gods to stabilize society, to make society possible. And I feel that there's something to it, and that this position has to be taken with due respect, right? It's like if I go out in the street and start shouting God doesn't exist, what kind of social consequences is it going to have? Is this going to have good social consequences? Is it even going to make the lives of people who hear this message better? Will they be able to understand it? Will they be able to respond to it? Right? It's like very often these religious debates turn into a shouting game, and I feel that's inappropriate. I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that. Right? It's like if I'm a believer in a free, open, respectful discussion, and simply fighting with words, having an opinion, and trying to impose it on somebody else, that doesn't sound very productive. More to be said about this, but let me continue, right? And another thing I want to say is that I feel that another maybe problem that I have with the new atheist movement is that I feel that we should be open-minded, or we should be open to the mystery of being. Kind of having Heideggerian vibes, so I'm somewhat comparing this to Heidegger, who was sort of an atheist, but also definitely was very open-minded with respect to the mystery of being, right? That, again, this universe is vast. And we, for all we know, we're only acquainted with a tiny sliver of everything that goes on, especially if you think of theories of, inflation, multiverse, and, who knows, certain forms of mathematical realism. Who knows? Who knows what's out there, right? So it seems a bit facile to say, well, no, God doesn't exist. We're here, and the simple laws of everyday life is the only thing that exists and the only thing that's constant, right? So in this sense, again, I don't want to use this as a carte blanche. I don't want to use this like as a blanket excuse to believe in whatever you want, right? That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. So this does not mean anything goes. So not anything goes. But I feel that there's value in trying to get attuned to certain subtlety that lies beyond the world of appearances. You know what? Let me not write subtlety. Let me write subtle mystery. Because who knows? Subtle mystery. What's out there? Who knows what's beyond that? A teacher of mine many years ago, when we were discussing these kinds of questions, told me, Alex, but how can you be an atheist? Surely, when you think about this seriously, surely you must believe that there's something out there. Surely you must believe that there's something out there. And it's kind of, in some sense, I want to have it both ways. Because, yes, I think we should be open to the possibility that there's something out there. But I also think that we should use our imagination. Something can have very different guises, right? Beyond, let me maybe also add this, right? So, something out there, with a question mark, beyond good and evil, beyond conscious or unconscious, with all of these with question marks. Beyond material or non-material, beyond spatial or non-spatial. Again, I feel that the only non-blasphemous attitude to God, the only non-blasphemous attitude to God, the only attitude which respects the theological possibilities, the only attitude that respects theological possibilities, is this skeptical attitude in the ancient meaning of the word skeptikos, that you keep inquiring, that you keep an open mind, That you don't just say, I have a creed, of 10 words, this is what I believe. No, let's keep an open mind. Let's keep searching and let's be open to the radical possibilities of what may turn out to be the fundamental principle of the universe, whether such a thing exists or whether such a thing is knowable or not. Okay. Let's take a deep breath. This has been a strange conversation, a bit personal, certainly more chaotic than it should have been. But that's the thing. These are difficult topics, and I'm not necessarily very comfortable talking about them in class because they're complex, because they're controversial, and because in class there's never maybe enough time to do them justice. So this is, in some sense, again, as very often happens on this channel, this is a first pass. And I do hope that we will keep thinking about this. We will keep thinking about this together in the spirit of open mind and an open discussion. I certainly don't want to make the impression that I'm trying to, stamp out disagreement and force people to accept my conclusions. No. Again, as a skeptic, again, in the ancient Greek sense, as an inquirer, I am perpetually open to the possibility of changing my mind. So I definitely would want to continue thinking about this and discussing this and hopefully progressing in my views in a sense of making them more coherent on this topic. I was kind of hesitant to even maybe start this video, but you know what? My channel has over 100 videos right now, so you know enough about my views, dear colleagues. To I feel you have. I feel I owe it to you. I feel you have a right to hear my opinions on this question as well. Anyway, so definitely gonna wrap this up now. So as always, I hope this, this was definitely a bit haphazard, I understand. But nevertheless, I hope this was stimulating. I hope some of the names maybe caught your eye. A whole bunch of topics we didn't talk about. I didn't get to Hegel. So maybe I'll come back to this in the future. So if you've actually sat through all of this, thank you very much for your company. And I suppose until next time, as always, stay safe and take care. Take care.